This week's Parsha, Mattos-Massey, ends Sefer B'Midbar, which is basically has been a preparation of Bnei Israel to live in Eretz Israel. All the Parashot, all the Inyanim, all the different matters basically speak to us in terms of what we have to do to advance our spirituality, to be able to cause ourselves to achieve a higher level of personal completion in order to be able to be matim, to survive and to live in Eretz Israel spiritually, so that we can survive and live in Eretz Israel physically, because the physical is dependent upon the spiritual clearly, right? And we've spoken about that in the past, the interconnection. There's a lot more to be said about that. The Parsha begins with a discussion about Nadarim, about taking vows, and specifically about how a woman living in her father's house makes vows, and how the father has certain koyach, certain ability, certain powers to annul those vows when he hears about them. And likewise, when the woman gets married and she leaves her father's house and she goes to her husband's house, he has even more koyach, more power to annul her vows as well. The question is, what's the emphasis? Especially since following this, we have the whole story of the revenge against Midian, which is followed by the episode of Bnei Reuven, Bnei Gad, and Chetzi Shevat Menashe. They come to Moshe Rabbeinu. They ask to live on the east side of the Jordan, which the Medrash says at the beginning of Galus Bavel, the first exile into Babylonia, which will not take place for another 850 years, but that's the beginning of it, because they did not cross the border to dwell in Eretz Israel. They asked the Gra, based upon the Zohar, what is the magical number of the Jewish people going to live in Eretz Israel, not just to pass through and to go on trips, on pilot trips, but to actually live in Eretz Israel? What is the magical number that is necessary for the sake of bringing about the redemption, the final redemption? And they said 600,000. Mistama between males between 20 and 60. And had these Shvatim not relinquished their portion in Eretz Israel, and actually had crossed over the Yarden to live in Eretz Israel with the rest of the Shvatim, that would have neutralized the Sitra Achra, right, the other koyach in creation, the negative koyach, the Tzahar, whatever, and that would have neutralized him and brought about the final redemption. So because they did not participate in the settling of the land, even though they fought for it, but they didn't actually settle the land, they gave up their portion, they took a portion instead of Ahar Yarden, the east side of the Jordan River, because of Maknei Rav, because of all the sheep they had, all the livestock they had, that they held off the final redemption, which resulted in the first exile later on. And as the Zohar points out, if you take the names Balak and Bilam, who were the ones responsible for the advice, for the aids of the whole plan of Bnei Midian, which resulted in Bnei Reuven, Gad, Menashe making this request later on, that in the names themselves you have Amalek, Ayin Mem Lamed Kuf, from Balak and Bilam, but the remaining letters are Bavel, base Lamed, to tell you that it was an Amalekian plan that Balak and Bilam assembled and implemented against the Jewish people, and the result is going to be Bavel, because also the word Bavel, Babel, means to confound, to confuse. They became confused, and therefore their priorities were all off, as we see in this week's Parsha. And that's why they went to Bavel. And the Bavel is the reality of Amalek, because Amalek is Safek. The gematria of Amalek is Safek, which means doubt, which results in Bilbul Adas, confusion, and eventually in a galus called Bavel. That's the Hamshah, that's the flow. The question is, why does it begin with the Parsha of Nadarim, and talking about specifically the annulling of the vows of a young lady or a wife when she gets married to her husband? So I saw a very nice vort, very nice Devar Torah in last week's Parsha, the Parsha before that, but it also built kind of what the Kli Yakar says, when it's a Shalach Lach Anoshim, he says, you send men, but he's medaik from that. I think the only one who says something like that, but it also makes a lot of sense to some degree, because you send men, Kosh Baruch Hu says, because I would send women instead. Because if you send men in, they're going to foul up the whole mission. They have personal agendas. They have different ways of looking at the reality than the Kosh Baruch Hu. They're going to follow up the whole mission. But the Nashim we see in Parashas Shalach, as Rashi points out elsewhere, that they were the ones who were devoted to going to Eretz Israel. And had they gone, of course it was not practical to send the women, but had they gone, at least conceptually, so they, not gone conceptually, but conceptually had they gone, that they would have come back with a favorable report, right? Like Yeshua and Caleb actually did in the end. See exactly what's going on over here. And the whole 40 years in the desert wouldn't have been necessary. So the word I saw last week was that it wasn't that the women were less afraid than the men to go to Eretz Yisrael. It wasn't that they didn't share the same concerns as the men shared in terms of going to a strange land, having to fight for, having to conquer the 31 kings of Canaan, and all the disruption of life and the danger inherent in doing so if the Jewish people did not maintain a high enough spiritual level. They had all the same concerns, all the same fears. So the question is, what was the difference over here? The difference was that in spite of their fears, they cherished the land more. In other words, they cherished the land of Eretz Yisrael more than they feared making aliyah and going into the land. That was the whole difference. The men cherished it less. The same level of fear, perhaps even less so to some degree, because men versus women over here. But the level of cherishing Eretz Yisrael was so great in the women that they were prepared to go up and take the risk of conquering the land, no matter where they were holding that time, because they had to go. They wanted to go. They had this tremendous drive, which is a Bina type drive, which is what women, that's the level of women. Bina Yisera. The men didn't have that, and that's why they failed. They cherished it less than their fears, and therefore their fears overcame it. And this is a tremendous musser for life, because people have all kinds of fears and concerns and obsessions in life that hold them back. People get nervous to stand in front of crowds. People get nervous going up and making a birchas Torah when they have an aliyah. People get nervous in this situation, and that they have fear of that situation. 100% people are always getting afraid. Professionals also get afraid of making mistakes. But they cherish the results more. They cherish what can come out of it more. They're afraid, but they cherish. And this is a tremendous musar for overcoming psychological barriers in life. If you can get yourself to the point where you can cherish something so much that the fear becomes secondary, you can be far more successful. But, says the Torah in this week's Parsha, you have to be careful. Because if you're not careful, you can go too far with this. You can cherish something so much that you can ignore the fear completely, and that can result in personal damage. That can result in family damage. You find this all the time. People going to extremes, religious extremes. In principle, the thing is good, but not to such an extreme. And that also tends to be a woman-based trait. Not dafka women per se, but a woman-based trait, because men also can have women-like qualities. Sensitivity, to be friendly, chesedic. You'll find that this aspect of men, you see also by men, they have X and Y chromosomes, right? There's an aspect of the woman, of the Bina type quality, the feminine type quality in a man as well, to bring out certain feminine characteristics. And so far, this parsha, the beginning of the parsha itself, is not that love dafka is talking only about women, but it's talking about that feminine type characteristic within a person, that's zrizis, that zealousness. And the Torah does say, David HaMelech wrote, Atata kum terchein Tzion, yes lechenik yivam moed. Kosh Baruch you get up and you'll show mercy to Tzion, because the appointed time the Gula will come. Why? What will be the basis of that? Ki ratzu avdeches efneya, because your servants will want her stones of Eretz Yisrael, just like when they cherish it. Ve'afrei chenenu, and they desire her dust. So that's a very, very strong, positive, feminine type quality as we see in Parashat Lachacha and elsewhere by Banot Slacha and last week's Parsha as well. They are cherishing, but you have to also limit it. You also have to gedari, and know to what extent you can go with that. So the masculine side in this week's Parsha represents more of the seichel. More of the, talking about a husband halachically and the father halachically, and this, of course, is the Metzias. But on a hashkafic level, is talking about how you have to temper that drive. Usually it's the other way around. Usually people have to fight to temper their logic. Men have to temper their logic with the cherishing, with the more feminine aspect, in order to get right what has to be done.